Hey class! So this week we're going to go over a few of the more foundational technical terms that will help you out when you're reading these articles as you continue through the course and hopefully as you continue on in your careers as evidence-based practitioners. So the three areas that we're going to focus on this week are hypotheses, independent and dependent variables, and operational definitions. And they all really fit together nicely, like a big jigsaw puzzle. So the first, the hypotheses, are very critical because they're sort of, if you think of the study as a novel, the hypothesis is the plot. What's the point? What are we doing? We frame hypotheses in science using what we call a null hypothesis. I know that seems strange, and for a lot of people it's not very intuitive. That's totally normal. There's a really interesting philosophical component to why we use a null hypothesis, and we're actually going to be going over that in a later chapter of this course. So don't worry too much about that right now. If you feel like it's weird, it might feel weird at first, it'll make more sense, and then we'll talk about why later on. So let's give you an example, and we can kind of build on that example moving through so you get a good idea of what all these components are. So let's say you want to run a study and you want to see if aspirin has an effect on headaches. So your null hypothesis is the opposite of the effect that you might be expecting. It's a non-effect. It's a non kind of directional thing. So it is, in this case, the null hypothesis is aspirin has no effect on headaches. That's what you're going to be using as the basis of your study. The opposite of this, the kind of the effect that you are interested in, is called the alternative hypothesis. In this case, it would be something like aspirin improves headaches. You might see one or the other actually written in the study. Sometimes they're not super clear. They should be written there. You should have all the information. They just might not say the null hypothesis is or the alternative hypothesis is. So you need to look for that kind of language as far as, does this have an effect on something? Does it not? Sometimes scientists will list out their null hypothesis. Sometimes they'll use the alternative hypothesis. But the null hypothesis is what you're actually testing. So moving on from that, what is it that you're testing? That would be your independent and dependent variables. So the hypothesis is the plot. This is your cast. Independent variables are the groups or the conditions that you're interested in, and dependent variables would be the things that you're measuring, the outcomes. So in our example, aspirin would be our independent variable, and headaches would be our dependent variable because we're looking at aspirin's effect on headaches. So that would be how that goes. You generally refer to the independent variable as far as the groups. In our case, the most simple way to do it would be a group that gets aspirin and a group that doesn't get aspirin. So aspirin versus no aspirin is a really common way to phrase that. So the dependent variable of headaches, well, how do we move forward from that? Well, that would be the next step. So if the independent and dependent variables are your cast, the operational definitions are sort of your casting call, the description of your cast. So headaches could mean anything, right? Obviously, it's a dolor in your cabeza, but how do we measure it? How do we define a headache? Is it the pain that someone self-reports? Is it somebody's ability to do a task that might be inhibited by a headache? How are we going to measure that? And that's up to the scientists who are doing the study, and it's important that they do something that makes sense. Generally, they want to pick something that has rationale, maybe some previous testing, but that operational definition is what gets us all on the same page so that when we're all thinking headache, we're thinking the exact same thing. It should be very clear, very precise, because the point of the operational definition is twofold. One, for scientists, it's to allow you to replicate the findings in a totally separate study. So if we're scientist A and we're doing this study on aspirin and headaches, maybe after we publish, scientist B says, well, I'd like to see if that works. I noticed that their population really just came from Minnesota. I'm in Arizona, and I want to test it in Arizona and see if it has the same effect. So that could be something that somebody needs a really clear definition of so they can set their study up the exact same way. Probably the more common use, the more broad use for you guys as practitioners, it allows you to compare studies yourself when you're kind of evaluating a larger body of literature. So if you're looking at different headache remedy articles, it's very helpful for you to be able to compare different studies that define headaches in similar or the same way. So that would be a way for you to make sure that you're not accidentally comparing apples and oranges, for example. So those are the 3 areas I really want you guys to internalize. Hypotheses, independent, dependent variables, operational definitions. If for any reason any of these are unclear to you, please get a hold of me as soon as possible, because these are going to be built upon and used throughout the rest of the course, so we want to make sure that you're nice and clear. As you practice, I think you're probably going to find that you get better and better at identifying and understanding these, but if you're really lost and you find that you just really are struggling to identify and really kind of characterize these things, let me know. You can shoot me a question in the questions for the instructor board, or you can send me an email. As always, if you have a question about anything else, you can do the same, questions for the instructor board or an email. This week, your guys' discussion topic is going to be to evaluate the hypothesis of a study. So a little different than earlier discussions where you're doing a whole section or a whole paper. You're really just evaluating the hypothesis here using Hauser's 6 criteria as you did last week. These are 6 new criteria, but the process for the discussion is very similar. So make sure you're kind of spreading them out, spreading the wealth so that not everybody's answering the same 1 or 2 questions over and over again. Give your peers a little something to talk about. So I am really excited for you guys to learn about all this material this week. I think you'll really enjoy it, and it's really going to open up your eyes and your minds to future research. So enjoy, get a hold of me if you have any questions, and I'll talk to everybody soon.